Hey, seventh grade. Core has figured out a plan to get Raymond, and they're just about to implement it. Let's see what happens. Chapter 15. Mrs. Tuttle had got the table she wanted, on the left of the band, which is where the cake came in, and really close to the double bass player. She was sure he fancied her. Every so often, when he wasn't sawing away with his bow, his eyes seemed to meet hers. What a lovely player he was. What a lovely man. Raymond was sitting opposite, dressed to kill in a new silk shirt and a spotty bow tie. And as she leaned forward to wipe the dribble of cream from his chin, Mrs. Trottle thought there wasn't a better-looking boy in the world. Her husband said she spoiled him, but Mr. Trottle didn't understand Raymond. The boy was sensitive. He had felt things. Bruce was standing by the far wall, his eye on Raymond. He was hungry, but no one thought of sending anything over for him to eat. His sister Doreen sat on a chair by the big double doors. Ordinary guests would have been surprised to see a woman knitting all through dinner, but there were enough people there who had used bodyguards in their time, and it gave them a good feeling to know that Soft Parts Doreen was in the room. No terrorists or assassins would get far with her around. In the phone box, across the street from the hotel, Core was reading the instructions, or trying to, but his spectacles kept falling off the end of his nose, and he didn't like the look of all those buttons. "Insert money," mumbled the wizard. "Dial number." But when he dialed it, something gloomy flashed onto the little gray screen and everything went dead. He tried again and the same thing happened. Then suddenly he lost his patience. They weren't supposed to use magic on the prince, but a telephone was different. He spoke the number of Astor. He turned to the east and uttered the calling spell. And on the reception desk of the hotel, the phone began to ring. "Oh, no, I can't come now." Mrs. Trottle glared at the page who had come to say that she was wanted on the telephone. The double bass player was playing something so dreamy that he must surely be playing it for her alone, and she almost decided to pluck the rose from her chest and throw it at him. "The gentleman said it was very urgent, madame," said the page, and Mrs. Trottle got up sulkily and followed him, while Bruce moved closer to Raymond and Doreen shifted slightly in her chair. Hans now entered the room. He had been incredibly brave and offered to have fernseed even in his eye so that he could be completely invisible and still see where he was going. His little finger was stretched out ready to bop Raymond, and it trembled because the ogre was very much afraid. Suppose he bopped too hard and brought the prince to the island with a broken skull? On the other hand, suppose he didn't hit him hard enough so that he squealed when he was thrown into the cake? If Hans was nervous, poor Gerke was terrified. "Oh, mother, forgive me," she muttered. She had been to Fortland's and bought some of the stuff they used for blackout curtains to make a vast veil, one of the one she wore over her underclothes, and the underwear itself was bottle green, chill-proof, because her mother had always told her that it was what you wore next to the skin that mattered. So even if the lights didn't go out all at exactly the right time, she would still be decent. All the same, she stepped into the cake. Gerke's teeth were chattering. At least the girl who usually did the dance of the seven veils was happy. She grabbed the money Core had given her, and even now was going up in a jumbo on the way to sunny Spain. "Ready?" asked the porter, coming to wheel her in. "Ready," squeaked Gerke from inside the layers of the tissue. The orchestra burst into fanfare. Balloons and streamers came down from the ceiling, and Gerke burst out of the cake and began to dance. Raymond didn't recognize her because even her face was veiled, and the light was rosy and dim, but everyone felt that something beautiful was going to happen, and they were right. Fays have always loved dancing. They dance around the meadows in the early morning. They twirl and whirl on the edge of the sea. And all of the twirlers and whirlers on the island, Gerke was the best. She forgot that her mother would have turned in her grave to see her in the dining room of the Astor Hotel like any chorus girl. She forgot that any minute Raymond Trottle would land with a thump on top of her, and as she danced, the orchestra followed the way she moved, got slower when she went slowly, quicker when she went fast, and there wasn't a single person in the dining room who could bear to take his eyes off her. Gertie dropped the first of her 7 veils on the floor. She was thinking of all the lovely things that grew on the island, and of her cucumbers, and how she would soon be home. But the people watching her did not know that. They thought she was thinking of them. And Hans had reached Raymond's table. He was standing in the space left by Mrs. Trottle. He was ready. The 6th veil dropped. The music got even soupier. Now, as she danced, Gertie was strewing herbs into the room, sweet-smelling herbs she had brought in her basket to make people sleepy or to make them forget their troubles. By the back entrance, Oj Gribble was explaining to the porter that her father had to leave early. "My mummy isn't well," she said with a lisp, and he nodded and pinched her cheek. In the lavatory, which led out of the dressing-room, the troll waited. He looked so like the double bass player that his own mother wouldn't have known him. Ben, crouching on top of the fire escape, kept his eyes on the waiting van. In the dining room, Gertie dropped her 5th veil, her 4th. She still spun and whirled, but more slowly now. The lights were turning mauve and then blue. "Coo!" said Raymond Trottle as she passed by his table. The 3rd veil now. The 2nd. And now Gertie did begin to worry. What if the lights didn't go out? Was her last veil really thick enough? But it was all right. Hans's little finger was stretched over Raymond's head. The orchestra went into a special swirly bit. The lights went out, and at that moment, Hans bopped. The getaway van was parked in the narrow road which ran between the back of the Astor and the river. It had been dark for some time. The passing boats had lit their lamps, and the light streamed from the windows of the hotel. The inside of the van was piled with blankets so that the prince could be made comfortable on the way back to the Gump. All the rescuers' belongings were there because they were driving straight to the station, and Oj's suitcase was there, carefully laid flat. The door of the van was open, and plenty of fresh air reached the mist-maker through the holes that Oj had drilled in it, so that he should have been content, but he was not. He was too old for suitcases. He was a free spirit. He was used to now being a part of things. Rustling about in the hay, complaining in the little whimpers, he put his sharp front teeth against the fiber of the case, and found a weak place where the rim of one of the holes had frayed. Getting interested, beginning to see hope, the mist-maker began to gnaw. The driver noticed nothing. He had his eyes fixed on the boy who crouched on top of the fire escape. As soon as Ben signaled with his torch, he'd be back against the entrance. In the dining room of the Astor, the guests waited for the cake. The orchestra played a tango. "It's awful hot in here," complained a girl at one of the tables, and called a waiter. The mist-maker went on gnawing. He was pleased. Something was happening. The hole was getting bigger and bigger still. His whiskers were already through, and his nose. Then, quite suddenly, he was free. Trembling with excitement, he sat up on his haunches and looked about him. And at that moment, one of the waiters opened a window in the dining room, sending the sound of the orchestra into the night. Music! What music! The mist-maker had never heard a full orchestra in his life. His eyes grew huge, his mustache quivered, and then with a bound he leapt out of the van and set off. The driver's eyes were still on Ben. Loping along like a lovesick pillow, the mist-maker crossed the road, leapt into the bottom rung of the fire escape, missed, and tried again. Now he was on, climbing steady. Oom-bumpa, went the band. The violins soared, the saxophones throbbed. Ben peered down the iron stairs, wondering if he had seen something white crossing the road. No, he must have been mistaken. The Astor was beside the river, and the river bank was full of rats, large, intelligent rats who had dug paths for themselves into the hotel. Panting up the first rung of the fire escape, the mist-maker found a hole in the brick and plunged into it. It came out near the kitchens, behind a store cupboard, and from there another rat led into the pantry where the waiter set out trays to carry into the dining room. He only had to cross a passage, run through an open door, and now he was where he wanted to be, where he absolutely had to be, facing that wonderful sound. He had just arrived as the cake was wheeled away. The room was in darkness, but that didn't matter because the band was still playing, and it was the Vietnamese waltz. The mistmaker made his way into the middle of the room and sat down. Never, never had he heard anything so beautiful. The fur on the back of his neck lifted. He shivered with happiness. His earlobes throbbed. "Ah," said the mistmaker. "Ah, ah." Waves of mist were slight to begin with. He was puffed from the climb and he was overwhelmed. But as the beauty of the music sank deeper and deeper into his soul, so did the clouds of whiteness that came from him. At one of the tables, an old gentleman began to cough. An angry lady leaned across her husband and told the man next to the table to stop smoking. "I'm not smoking," said the man crossly. But as the lights came on again, the guests could see that something odd was happening. The room was covered in a thick white mist, so thick that the Trottles' table could hardly be seen. And we'll keep reading a little bit more tomorrow. Bye, guys.